What's up guys, Houndish here, and today I wanted to talk about the Curse of Osiris, do kind of a mini review, talk about the new content and my thoughts on the DLC, but I also want to talk about the future of the game and things that I think need to be improved moving forward, and I'm going to touch on some of the recent controversy around Bungie's locking away of certain content, some of which was actually in the base game of Destiny 2 and now can only be played if you have the DLC. So while this is a review of the expansion, it's also kind of a general impressions of where we're at, and I'm going to start by talking about the actual content within the DLC. So of course the Infinite Forest is one of the core elements of this expansion, and it's something that Bungie pushed pretty hard when they were promoting this. It is a pretty interesting idea, a secondary extended space which houses some of the content and plenty of the story locales in this expansion. Naturally, this is never really a problem for Bungie, but the Infinite Forest looks absolutely amazing, and the space does an okay job of housing the new content within it. My main complaint would be the feeling that most of the pathways to the actual important areas in the forest are simply that, they're just pathways. And often what you end up with is this really linear feeling space where you find yourself just running through to get where you actually want to be, and too much of the space consists of these pathways if you ask me. Bungie of course wanted to show off and utilize their new tech with these kind of jigsaw-like generations of levels in the Infinite Forest, but gameplay wise it does feel like these pathways and fighting demons to get into the forest are simply to make activities longer, as opposed to actually creating meaningful gameplay. Once you get to your destination in the forest though, things do feel a little bit better, and I can't say that the engagement spaces are bad on the most part, but it would have been nice as well to actually have the Infinite Forest be an openly explorable space to collect bounty and materials in, just like the rest of Mercury's patrol space. In the case of Mercury itself, I think more of the development time could have been put into the space to improve the scale of things. However, I think the public event and the small amount of content that is on Mercury is pretty good in itself. I don't dislike Mercury or the Infinite Forest by any means, I just feel like there are a ton of opportunities for the spaces, and sometimes there's been a little bit too much wasted effort on certain aspects which don't really feel like they benefit the experience in the long term. It is good that we have a couple of new strikes utilising the space as well. They made for pretty interesting story missions, although where the Pyramidion and Inverted Spire feel like very well thought out strike encounters, the Mercury strikes feel a little bit more akin to, you know, things like the Malak strike from the April update in D1, where you're kind of just running through a space backwards, you know, missing meaningful encounters in order to just kill a boss and get it done. They aren't terrible strikes, but they are by no means the best that we've seen so far. But now I'll get onto the slightly more engaging subject of weapons and gear in the DLC. A main component of this expansion is the ability to forge weapons in the Lighthouse, which does 100% add to the progression game if you ask me. It's a pretty cool idea, but in delivery there are a couple of nagging things. So firstly, I'd say the randomness of the materials you need for forging is kind of an issue. You need things like radiolarian culture, paradox amplifiers, and what my friend Easy described as a fossilized hemorrhoid. This part in itself is a pretty cool concept with the exception of the randomness in the drops, especially for things like radiolarian culture. Farming for some of the materials here is simply too repetitive in my opinion. Of course, to a degree, repetition is part of any grind, and that's certainly okay. I think that's something that Destiny players want to a degree, but I feel like a little more of what we're doing could be action oriented, you know, complete a certain activity or set of challenges to unlock X material. I think Bungie can find more of a middle ground with how we invest into quests like this. A good balance between random drops and assigned objectives could definitely go a long way. I'm not hating on the system, I'm really happy that this system is here, but like basically all of the investment and economy systems, it needs some work. And this is probably where I'm going to get a little bit harsher. Of course, we have the weapons which come from the forge. Some of them are more obviously reskinned than others, but they still look cool to me at least. The bigger issue I have here, and this is how I feel in many of the loot-driven aspects of the game, the issue for me is that sometimes I think Bungie forget why we like unique and cool weapons and the reasons that we want to grind for them, and frankly it comes down to power and having something unique. Fatebringer, Black Hammer, Ex Machina, Vision of Confluence, all of those are weapons that we adored more or less, and the reason for this is because they were powerful, sometimes they were dangerously powerful, and to be quite frank, you need to make weapons and their roles more appealing, Bungie. We lost random weapon rolls for the sake of balance, and we've heard the term curated from the Sandbox team, so why do we need to be so afraid of power? I understand that balance is an important focus here, but imbalance and risk are also things which players of Destiny respond to and have always responded to. My problem is that with some of the forge weapons, it literally feels like someone has sat there and said, what are the safest possible perk sets that we could throw on this weapon if we were to chuck it into the game tomorrow morning? You know, what is the least likely combination to cause a problem in our sandbox? I'm not saying that that is how Bungie have designed these weapons, but the results feel lackluster in too many cases. Bungie, I think you need to take things that work and excite players, you know, Nameless Midnight, Better Devils, and then look to the past, even with weapons like Steel Modulus, Might of Moraine, as well as Fatebringer and all those others. You need to look at why those weapons work and how you can do that again. Of course, not everything can always be god tier or be the best thing in the game, but I think you need to tone down the fear that comes alongside the idea of balance. I'm not saying everything should feel like Prometheus Lens in PvP, but to be frank, I think most of us would rather see a little imbalance here and there than see considerably less exciting weapons. It just doesn't feel like it's paying off right now. But that's something that can absolutely be changed. Exotics wise, I think everything new is really cool and totally validated. There is a lot of conversation about returning D1 exotics, and personally, I like seeing exotics come back. However, I don't think we should see so many which are paid DLC items. Frankly, there should have been at least another new weapon and maybe an armor piece per class which was brand new, and what I think should be done with returning exotics is have a mid-season infusion of new exotic gear. So, you know, say 5 or 6 weeks into a season, you could drop a new batch of things to excite and engage players for a little longer while we wait for the next season or DLC. I am going to sideline a little bit here from the actual review. On the subject of loot, we could argue that fixed weapon rolls should or shouldn't be a thing. For me, I would rather have random rolls on weapons. It's that simple. I understand why they aren't here, but I think the issues that random perks cause are the lesser of two evils. That is my perspective though. Another thing I'd really like to see are random rolls on armor pieces, because it would create so much replay potential for some players. Because do I want a full set of the hardest gear to obtain in the game to come with mobility across the board? Not really, no. For a lot of people, when we played raids in D1, we were going through armor sets looking for the best stats and the kind of perks that we wanted so that we could maybe get tier 11 or tier 12 on a VOG or Wrath of the Machine armor set with bonuses that we also wanted. It feels like the loot concept back in D1 raids, and especially with the challenge modes, was shower players with loot, then let them pick through and slowly build a set which would never just kind of land in your lap, you know, something higher tier, which makes players feel connected to the gear that they're wearing. I found these pieces, I chose this combination, and now I have the coolest looking set with the best bonuses. You know, it makes things feel special. And in D2, we have a prestige raid set for a hunter which comes with mobility only. Basically, nobody wants those stats on armor sets for the toughest PvE content especially. And my problem there is that not only have we lost the ability to build cool matching sets, but we've also been given fixed ones which don't solve the issue either. I think as long as you manage and cap the stats appropriately, you could have random armor stats for drops in the raid and trials, and then the ability to invest and earn items to re-roll armor stats on things like the Iron Banner or faction armor. I know this whole conversation was slightly off subject, but it does feel relevant. Now though, I wanted to talk about the raid lair. It's an interesting point of discussion, and it's one that's really close to my heart. Raids are pretty much my favorite thing in Destiny. So we had the Eater of Worlds lair in a new section of the Leviathan ship, and the lair concept was pretty controversial. A lot of folks didn't consider it to be a new raid, which was an idea that I didn't really subscribe to based purely on the fact that it's still on Leviathan, you know. I kind of expected Vex or something different all along. Either way, I think we're all glad that it wasn't simply more Cabal, and now that it's here, I think the concept is actually really awesome. It's turned Leviathan into the kind of memorable, exotic place that it should be, and I think these lairs have a lot of potential in the future. But on the subject of integration with the ship and the Emperor, the whole idea of the Leviathan, my one key frustration is that the timeline with the Emperor's dialogue in the raid is kind of confusing, and in addition to this, either the voice actor for the Emperor in the lair is a completely different one, or simply hasn't been produced very well to sound like the same actual character. The Emperor talks to us in the raid as though he's never met us, and then at the end tells us of future challenges, and it sounds like conceptually this raid was supposed to come first. I'm kind of confused by it, but my main point, although raids aren't typically specifically story pieces, is that the dialogue spoils some of the immersion around the idea that this is all under the supervision of Callus, but I digress. For me, the raid was short, but it was very sweet. The opening encounters and puzzles are engaging and very atmospheric, and mechanically, it's pretty fun warm-up to the actual encounters. The main boss fight was a lot of fun. It's a very large-scale engagement and it requires a lot of movement. It reminds me an awful lot of Axis from Wrath of the Machine in how kind of frenetic it is. I also like the scaling element of climbing up the scaffolding around the boss to do the stun mechanic. It feels like a really fun action-packed fight where the roles are a little bit less strict and fixed than what we saw in the main Leviathan raid. My rating is that it's another fantastic encounter from a very competent raid team. The issue though, again, is going to be with loot. The loot pool is very minimal and obviously hasn't had the kind of work put in that we've seen in other raids. Essentially it suffers just like Leviathan did on that front, but it's even smaller, so even less loot of course, and Bungie, you need to get ghosts, sparrows, and ships into the raid. It's a huge waste when you consider that vanity items in previous raids, for some, were a really big replay incentive. Surely if you can have a team invest in huge, beautiful spaces, some of the coolest alien bosses that you'll find in any media, frankly, and engaging mechanics, then also you can surely get a team to get the loot system right. Make it rewarding and make it replayable. Otherwise though, I think it's definitely a good addition to the game. To touch on the story in the expansion, it was cool in terms of bringing us a little closer to the character of Osiris and learning just a little bit more about him. I mean, we at least know what he's up to now. Gameplay wise, there were some cool moments, and I think the level design using the Infinite Forest, especially for the final mission, was in fact something new and pretty interesting. Osiris actually became part of the encounter in a pretty unique boss phase. Otherwise though, I didn't feel like I connected as a Guardian with Osiris very well. There was a very basic story arc which felt almost like more of a small chapter of things that happen between characters that I'm witnessing, as opposed to something that I'm actually a part of. I also wish we knew more about Panoptes, the central villain here, because of course while Osiris is the key focus, this is also kind of a Vex expansion. What we got was cool, but it didn't break the mold of Destiny's storytelling, and much of it didn't feel like it was glued together as nicely as it should have been. Yet again, with Curse of Osiris, the content side feels like it's a few steps away from being pretty good. The systems in the game in many respects feel similarly close to being fairly decent. Of course though, with December and the DLC, we are getting quality of life improvements and additions, and in my eyes, every single one of them is a step in the right direction. I'm not saying that the game is fixed or what Bungie have done is, really drastic, but it's a response which improves some of what is there, and for people who still play, it's very welcomed. To me, Curse of Osiris is worth it for players who still invest and those who want more, but for those who want real change, I don't think it has done enough. Some players will never return to Destiny now, some will consider it if we get a Taken King style drop with the vast system changes we saw, after a year of D1. For now though, we can't afford for Bungie to go dark in early 2018. We need a continuous conversation, consistent updates, and it cannot wait until, DLC 2, especially DLC 3, and this really summarizes my thoughts on where we are right now. A lot of people have asked me about, what Bungie have been up to with XP throttling and things like that, which I have touched on in previous videos, but on the subject of locking content behind the DLC, Heroic Strikes are a prime example of that. More obnoxious though is that they've removed things from the base game like prestige activities, which now mean that players without the DLC can't complete certain objectives which are actually outlined in the base game, and quite frankly, it's a disgusting way to behave when you start taking things away in order to incentivize purchasing a DLC. It also comes at a time where we've had a bunch of controversy, around microtransactions, XP throttling. I have a deep love of the work that Bungie do. The creators and the people who, leave the loving fingerprints on the game, they're the ones that I respect. I am, however, tired of seeing new ways in which Bungie seemingly screw players over and literally throw fuel at a ring of fire around their feet. What is apparent to me is how short-sightedly mismanaged things seem to be right now. When people start to think that making money by any means is your primary objective, Bungie, I don't know what to say. I'm really disappointed by the decisions which have been made here, and Bungie, you should be protecting your reputation and proving yourself instead of this crap. I love your game, despite its flaws. I love the individuals who pour every fiber of their being into creating something special, and I love this community, so why don't you just stop fucking people around? It's unacceptable, and if you want to keep the players who still have some patience and respect for you, then you need to take a serious look at what you're doing. I apologize if I was a little bit heated there, guys. I'm just trying to demonstrate my frustration here, and sometimes, you know, you have to be real and you have to be harsh, otherwise things don't change. I'm still a huge fan of Destiny though. I think it has a lot of potential if Bungie make the right decisions, and I think this community deserves that to happen. So anyway, I'll be curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section, guys. Also represent how you feel by dropping a rating down below. If you're new to the channel though and you want more conversation about Destiny going forward, feel free to hit that subscribe button. But for now, thank you for watching. I'll catch you very soon.